Hey everybody, welcome back to the Billy Club, where we take a look at the adventures of Marvel's Crimson Crusader, starting with his first ever swing in the 1960s and making his way through his horn-headed antics now. I'm Nico, and you guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at NicoAction. That's NicoAction.
And I'm Tori. You can find me at Tori_Sheen on Twitter and at SMTori. That's Tori with an I on Instagram. And you can follow this entire podcast at the Billy Club Pod on Twitter and Instagram.
And we are here today to talk about Daredevil number 15, which, after that three-part Kazar thing we just did, I'm kind of relieved to be sitting on a one-shot, even if it's kind of a silly one.
Yeah, I mean, the Ox is a choice from 18 months ago, but
yeah,
it's not like he takes up more of the cover than Daredevil does. Oh wait.
Back to those days.
Those
right?
days. Yeah.
And it's not even like he's a particularly dynamic villain. Like, I know I'm a big fan of like the big hulky muscle guys, but one of the things I like about the big hulky muscle guys is when they're complicated inside, is when they display a sense of emotional and mental depth. When they create an argument for why the muscle is less interesting than everything else, even though the muscle is still pretty great, right? Yeah. For me, Ox doesn't really offer that. Well, maybe the last page, but
yeah, the last couple pages, I was like, no, I love my big hulking small man.
Right? So, all right, just to jump in for a moment, this issue was brought to us by Stan Lee, John Romita on pencils. Now, of course, that's John Romita Sr., not Jr., who would go on to make his mark on Daredevil in the 1980s. John Romita is probably best known for his time on Spider-Man, where he did an incredible job following up some unbelievable legends. We have incredible inks by
Frankie Ray.
Frankie Ray. I'm like, Artie Simek. Wait, no, I'm looking right at it. So sorry, Frankie Ray. In my defense, Frankie Ray is also the name of a character in the Fantastic Four. So I have to assume it's a tribute, but it's one of those things where I'm kind of like, am I saying the name of the person or the character? And so I get a little nervous. But it is so interesting that we still don't have anybody credited on colors.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, is it because the artists have been working on it, or is it because there are women who have been doing uncredited work?
I can't think of too many women who would later get their due at Marvel who haven't been credited to specific times. In the last few years, we've had a number of unbelievable moments of sort of like fandom clarity where an undiscovered name suddenly boils to the top, and now all of a sudden we see the through line of color that follows on all of the titles that we find out that inevitably she worked on. So I feel like a lot of those have risen to the surface, and we've talked about them culturally at some point, but I don't know that I've ever heard somebody come into context here for that. I would love to be wrong, and I would love to be corrected and find out that this was, colored by Joan Romita, and we're just always forgetting about her. But until then, I'm going to have to assume that this was bullpen nonsense, where there were people who were just kind of treated like garbage. Their names never showed on anything. And then eventually their names did show on things. They were treated a little bit less like garbage.
Everybody loves a 5-cent intern.
Oh, man, it's the overnight 20-year success story. You spend 20 years of waiting to make it overnight. You know what I mean? And so that's, I think, one of the big things we see here where John Romita, I feel weird about John Romita taking this book, not because I don't think John Romita does a great job. He does an incredible job. I'm a big fan of the family's pencil work, although probably a bigger fan of John Romita Jr. This morning in a recording for X's for Podcast, our partner show, I was just talking about how I think John Romita Jr. should literally draw everything for the rest of time. And he is still fucking swole. He is still jacked posting to his Instagram.
Good for him.
It is awesome.
Yeah.
And I just feel like one of the things we've bemoaned in the course of Daredevil so far is how by being so inconsistent, the pencils have been consistent, but that means that John doesn't have a lot to step into.
Yeah. Yeah. I will definitely say that like Matt is getting hotter and Karen has 5 facial expressions now as opposed to 2. And Foggy is becoming distinct from Matt, which is good. So we're getting a little more distinction between them, but I feel like it's still not quite distinct enough between them.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of generic 1960s man on the screen, and I do think on the page, and I do think that's why when you've got guys like Strag and Ox, they perhaps stand out a little bit, because even when we're saying that Matt is drawn kind of unassuming physically and Foggy, Foggy is realistic body man at this point. He probably has a pretty reasonable BMI at this time. And I even think, Foggy today, chubby Foggy, is still like a guy I would definitely follow on OnlyFans. So it's not like we're ever saying that Foggy is ever really pushed to a place of actual physical.
Right.
But, he is certainly spoken of as though he is. And at this point, he's still just kind of like a handsome, everyday, fit-ish guy. It's not until Matt takes off the shirt that Matt starts to look like, fuck. Because in their shirts, otherwise, they look very similar.
Yeah. I mean, Foggy very much gives me the look of like just a well-fed rich guy.
Yeah.
And I think that I don't know why he only has eyes for Karen or why Karen's his only option. Because like looking at him, knowing he's in a successful law firm, there is no reason why he shouldn't be able to wander into any bar and get whoever he wants, go to a dance hall, get a gal and like marry her in 6 weeks. Like there's no reason. So it's always very strange to me when everyone's like, ugh, Foggy, he's such a schlub. I was like, for the time, like he's a solid catch. And not even like one that you're like, I'm settling for less. Like you're like,
right.
No, I got this. Like this is a guy who could at some point maybe like be in the mayor's cabinet. Like,
if Matt hadn't, Matt is special. I'm not coming for Matt Murdock. I think Matt Murdock is special above many other fictional characters in his caliber.
mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But one of the things that stands out for me about Matt Murdock is he sort of steps in and steals other people's narratives a lot. And we'll talk a lot about that as we go on with him in The Hand and sort of the bigger picture of magic as it relates to Daredevil. But at this point, this should be Foggy's minute. Like, by 1960 standards, because today we know better. We know that simply because you have a disability does not mean that you are in any way anything less. The hysterical thing of the TikTok generation thinks Helen Keller is made up is horrifying. Disabilities do affect your life, but they do nothing to affect your quality of person. Mm-hmm. And so to take it back to 1964, 1965, 1966, that was not the prevalent notion. So by my standards, Foggy should think that this is Foggy's time.
Oh, yeah.
This is Foggy's fucking moment. Yeah. And here's Matt, who, what the fuck? How does Matt always get his way?
Yeah. He's got main character syndrome where he's just going to come in, steal your girl, steal your job, like steal all your limelight. And you're just like, yes. Wait. And you're like, I love the guy, but like, what the fuck?
I love the guy, but if I knew Matt Murdock in person, if Matt Murdock were my buddy, I might go nuts. Like, because I probably like to think myself a Matt Murdock, but like, realistically speaking, Matt Murdock thinks himself a Matt Murdock, and then he meets Elektra. So Matt Murdock thinks himself a Matt Murdock, and then there's Bullseye, who is still the stupidest of the assassins. Don't get me wrong, but boy, does it miss. So...
Yeah. And so basically, we're talking about the fact that Daredevil's just been swinging around, doing a whole bunch of nothing, and then Karen and Foggy like stumble in from where Foggy has had lingering concussion syndrome.
It's not funny. It's not funny that he has lingering concussion syndrome. What's funny is that like we've seen him violently jostled and totally fine, but walking with Karen and he gets the vapors.
He's so in love. He can't. Oh, the birds, they're tweeting and moving really quickly, and he's gotta lie down.
Wait, there's birds again? Wait, where are the birds?
Where are the birds? The birds. I have to say, like, as a person who has tried to move a man who is about foggy size off of the sidewalk before, like, kudos to Karen, because I wasn't in heels and I couldn't fucking do that.
And she's 60s woman strong, which is to say that, like, number one, gyms are not like a thing like they are today. Health
No,
clubs are kind of a
she had
thing.
like a
Racquetball clubs.
vibrating belt that she would stand on.
It shakes the fat off. And this is back when, like, we think about, like, people making phone calls and it's men making power play phone calls. But, like, phones are for women by this cultural interpretation. Like, oh, it's Chatty Cathy and she's being gossipy. And, like, it is the strangest thing to me that we're supposed to think that Karen has all of these hallmark traits of women in the 1960s, but she doesn't even have a fucking female friend to talk to about these things. We are so starved for women that Karen can only think about how much she needs men. She can't even talk to another woman about it.
When was the last time we had a Karen alone scene that didn't involve Daredevil watching her?
I don't know. It is.
We have her waiting by the phone for something, I think, is like the most we ever get is her waiting by the phone. Yeah. And I'm just like, she really is just a dude's fantasy of what a nice lady would be like.
And I guess that's why she's like blonde and fair with soft features, because there is something about being non-conventionally attractive that automatically, by like 1960s comic standards, adds depth to you, like in a really shallow way. I'm not like,
brunettes, can you believe? They have
oh my God. It's, they've got to, because they're brunettes. And that's where this story really actually plays up a lot of those elements. Something that I think is really interesting is the crux of this story is a scientist, Strag, wants to switch bodies with Ox. So he helps him break out of jail and is like, I'll give you some of my brains for your body, and instead just switches their minds and goes on like a rampage as Ox with Ox's strength, while Ox is trapped in the body of a mild, meager scientist. Ultimately, he is felled by Daredevil because, I don't know, the Ox Force takes over.
Yeah, it seems like
being big makes you stupid.
Being big makes you stupid. Being small makes you smarter. It's very strange. I do have to admit that I had to Google it because I honestly thought that Carl Strag was one of the rando scientists that we had met before. But this is the point where I realized that all of the random scientists feel like caricatures of Project Paperclip, and which, if anybody doesn't know, that Project Paperclip is when we brought over a bunch of Nazi scientists to help put us on the moon. And they're all just sort of that way.
And the rest went to South America.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, those were the ones who ran. These were the ones that we were like, we know that you experimented on people, but we'd really like to know what you learned.
The guys who got the Zola treatment.
Yeah.
So
those guys.
I think one of the other things that sets this book on an interesting path is we're reminded that Ox fought Daredevil in issue 6, right? Fellowship of Fear. So the last time Ox fought Daredevil also had yellow. Now, Ox is the big yellow and green guy. Daredevil's in red. There's elements of switching their costumes around. This issue sort of reads like a new season premiere. And I think a lot of that has to do with that Kazar 3-parter ultimately reads like a road bump now. Yeah. And like a bit, like it reads like Belgian blocks. Like I fucked my tires up on it. And I didn't need some of the other stories leading into it. Ultimately, that Wally Wood story was a miss. But
until she comes back.
Well, yes. But this overall return to form, even if I don't love this issue, because there's a lot of things about this issue that maybe drive me a little crazy. I feel like this is the closest to Daredevil we've been since the Namor fight, or maybe Stiltman. And I'm glad to be closer to Daredevil. I'm a little unsure why we are using size politics here. Big means bad, small means good. And that carries that David and Goliath framework, I guess, but we're frequently told Matt's the big. So does that mean when Matt's fighting goons, he's the bad?
It's really, this goes back to the idea of Daredevil becomes whatever he needs to be to defeat people. If he's
Excellent,
fighting
yeah.
smart people, he's super strong. If he's fighting strong people, he's super smart. So now what happens to Matt if we put a super smart into a super strong? What can Matt do?
Yeah, he has to be cunning.
Yes, he has to be cunning, and he has to hope that suddenly the magic wears off.
It also speaks to the limited framework of Stan Lee and co.'s understanding of power dynamic as it relates to societal influence. It's something that we'll see a lot more later on, even still in this infancy of Marvel, where it's almost like if you're little, you can't be evil, which is why the Stiltman thing fucked us up so good. Mm-hmm. Because we were like, oh my God, he's the little one. He can't be evil. But then he was. So the idea that being physically big automatically gives you an advantage that has to be overcome. It's weird that there wasn't more Ox doesn't know how to use this body to the point where he can't coordinate himself. Like, I understand 1960s comic book storytelling, but these stories are still available. They're still printed from time to time. That omnibus edition is so beautiful, and it has these books in it. I'm not saying that I think maybe we should go back and edit them, but we should look at them with both sets of eyes, a 60s set of eyes and a modern set of eyes.
Yeah.
By 60s standards, this is a cartoon. By modern standards, this is a kind of a flunk.
And it should have definitely been in that first fight, like a moment or two where Strag, as in the Ox's body, like over swings or overcompensates or does all those kinds of things that I feel like we've seen one or two people in Daredevil do before, where they're like, I don't know my own strength. Whoops.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of where I am. I also found this jailbreak scene to be way too long. I think we could have started. I think we could have started off with, two prisoners have escaped, and then Strag and Ox going, and Strag's like I promised, I'm about to help you get smarter, and Ox being like, you better, I broke all those things, and we're going on a motorcycle. And I would have been like, great, thank you, done.
One of those like great newspaper images that they love to use, where we just see the cover of the newspaper, and it says everything we need to know about the situation.
Yeah, but then at the same time, where would we have stretched for an extra 4 pages?
I don't know, because I did also think that the brain switch was a stretch for an extra 4 pages. I thought Foggy being injured from Ox was a stretch for an extra 4 pages. The big thing that I'm taking from these issues of Daredevil is that unlike issues of Spider-Man, unlike issues of X-Men, where I think classic Amazing Spider-Man is a good book written by someone who doesn't understand teenagers, I think classic X-Men is kind of a bad book written by someone who doesn't understand teenagers, but I can understand what they're trying to do, right? I think one of the things that we run into with Daredevil is that this was a bad book that should have been backup stories, but I see what they were trying to do. If Daredevil had just been 8 to 10 pages a month, we would not have as many of the things we complain about.
No, we would not. And I think part of it is the problem of the time, where there's so many words on the page, there's so many thought bubbles, we tell, we don't show. The panels are very strict. There's not a lot of play yet.
There's not any real redefining of the gutters, right? The gutters are the things outside of the panel boxes, for anybody who's not super Scott McCloud on Making Comics, right? The gutters, especially in modern comics, have become a hallmark of storytelling, where you change the gutter to indicate something you're trying to explain, or you have characters step outside of it to add dimension. If you want to show that a character is coming at you, you have them come out of it so that their legs come over the gutters, and it creates like a really stunning transformation of the expectation of the image. Daredevil is exactly the right character for that. And fighting someone like Ox is exactly the right person to have hit the gutter and shatter it.
Yep.
And we will eventually get really cool stuff like that under brilliant artists. And not to say that John Romita wasn't brilliant, but the 1960s barely understood what a gutter was.
They just didn't know what to do yet. They didn't know what to do, which is fine. Like, that's fine. But it does make you consider like what we're working with here.
For sure.
I think a lot of times they decide that while they want this to continue to be a romance comic, they can't allow the romance to be the A plot.
It can't ever take center, yeah.
Right, because what they could have done is had 4 pages of Karen with Foggy, and like a half confession out of Foggy and a half like refusal from Karen that's not really a refusal, and a conversation sort of about Matt that's really about them, and like that would have been interesting and fun.
Yeah.
And instead we get her walking home and attacked.
The thing that points back to for me, which storytelling faults, an over sense of fragility of women, an inability for characters to express their emotions. It also tells me that they feel the need to go back to the same 5 or 6 things. And I'm wondering at this point how much they go back to those same 5 or 6 things because they're traceable. Like the brain switching sequence looks like any 1960s brain switching sequence out of anything by anyone who's ever seen a Boris Karloff film. Ever. There is nothing unique about it. It could just straight the fuck up be traced out of a 1950s horror comic. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because today the shorthand for that is Photoshop, is digital tablets. It's Control-Z, so you can do the line again. Back then, you needed your own shorthand for what technology allowed.
Yeah. And I feel like this was their way of being like, what if we did a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but it's 2 different dudes? And I'm like, okay, I mean, that's not like the worst thing I've heard, like as a take. But I just feel like this could have been executed smoother and allowed for more character development, which we are sorely lacking. Because we haven't even gotten to like the hallmark of Matt being like, should I be Daredevil? Should I not? Like, is it right for me to punch people when I should be working on the side of the law? Like, we haven't even gotten to that. We're still on like, I'm so excited to swing.
And it's partially that I think they're trying to stretch for Paige, and that's why we get Daredevil dressed as Ox. That's why we get some of the sillier conventions of Daredevil, because, as soon as you said the hallmark of, I was immediately like, or I knew what you were going to say, because it's like the only thing that happens every issue that we haven't said yet. And so that was the last thing left to hit. The sort of question of dual identity. But the question of dual identity is the inherent battle here. Is being Daredevil or Matt Murdock better? Is being the small guy and not putting yourself in harm's way better, or being the big guy better? Because the thing is, this mad scientist's body is used both times to not engage. Mm-hmm. The only time somebody directly engages with the fight is as Ox, one way or another. So it feels like that's meant to be a parallel for what Matt and Daredevil are going through. And if not meant to, it's something we can definitely see must have been cycling through the creators' minds without even realizing it.
I mean, they very specifically put Daredevil in the Ox's clothes. They very specifically say that this is the big guy. Secondly, sidebar, the NYPD would have pulled that mask off before they even picked him up off the street. Are you fucking kidding me? The lawyers are deciding whether or not this was the fucking 60s. He's a red commie. Let's move on.
He's literally a guy running around dressed as the devil just a few years before everything got real helter-skelter in LA.
Yeah, the Irish Catholic cops are not going to let this roll. Sorry, not sorry. So I very much feel like there isn't as much of like Matt deciding he has to be the smart guy in the fight because being the big guy didn't work.
Yeah.
There's still him just being like, I gotta go punch him, I gotta go find him on top of a helicopter or whatever. So like, um, I also gotta say, if Karen lives up by Columbus Circle at this point, she's actually in a kind of a shitty neighborhood still, and like kind of a neighborhood of color that she doesn't belong in.
And she's kind of traveling an unusual distance for her to constantly be in proximity of all the right things. Like, that's something that occasionally gets me. You guys lived in New York at this time. You guys know what? You guys know what a mile is.
Yeah.
So I think it's that thing of when Rent travels, the traveling production of Rent uses some changed lyrics because they believe that a non-Broadway audience wouldn't know what certain things are. For instance, in a eulogy in the second act, a character says someone showed someone else where the circle line is. In the international and touring versions, it's changed to the Statue of Liberty. Mm-hmm. In another song, it's referred to as you can take the girl out of Hicksville, but you can't take the Hicksville out of the girl. Many people might just think that she's being called a hick, but Hicksville, New York is a real place. Mm-hmm. So it's changed to Jersey everywhere else. Mm. So I feel like sometimes a layer I need to add in is even as far back as the 90s, and then, look at Nintendo constantly region changes games. Every video game company does. I just happen to know Nintendo region changes a little better than most companies. And, you sometimes do create less accurate work to make it easier for people to digest by having a recognizable name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess.
But
then you choose Hell's Kitchen.
Because he's the devil.
Dude,
and it's hot in the kitchen.
I wonder if non-New York people think that it's like Gotham, where they just like name
Google
an area of New York.
Google it. They think it's made up all the time. People think it's made up all the time. My boyfriend lived in Hell's Kitchen for a couple of years, and I used to show up in my Daredevil hoodies, and he would be like, it's crazy that I live in Hell's Kitchen, and you're wearing Hell's Kitchen Boxing Club? When did you fucking go to Hell's Kitchen? I don't think there is a place called Hell's Kitchen Boxing Club. And I'm like, no, it's from Daredevil. And he's like, wait, they would set that in a real place? It's not like Gotham? And so there's both sides of it!
Yeah. Because like you're like, oh, Spider-Man's in Queens. We know what Queens is.
We know what Queens is.
We know what Midtown is.
The Shi'ar live on Chandelar? I don't think that's a real planet.
In fact, you can find Bleecker Street. It exists.
But you know what doesn't? The Baxter Building and the Brownstone. Yeah. So we're nowhere near the Brownstone. Oh. Man, I can't wait to get to Daredevil in like the 120s. Around the 120s, this thing really starts to crack.
Yeah.
But before that, we get some great Black Widow. And I don't mean to long for Black Widow, but I will trade in these sort of, without any disrespect, second-rate New York shenanigans for some California girl cool any day of the week. I love what the book comes to mean for women characters. Yeah. That's part of what makes this so fucking hard, is that there are always incredible women in Daredevil. And right now, Karen Page isn't even a cool version of Karen Page.
Yeah, she gets better.
She does. She gets so cool.
After heroin. Dating a flaming motorcycle guy doesn't even help her out for a little bit there.
I can't wait to talk about Ghost Rider with you, because I've had a real weird vengeance on this show lately. So over on X's for Podcast, we've been covering everything Ghost Rider because I'm obsessed with the Latino Ghost Rider, Robbie Reyes. He means so much to me. I also have a huge mat-on for Kushala, who is a native woman who was both sorceress supreme and a spirit of vengeance. So that's just like the coolest possible combination. There's a number of other really amazing Ghost Riders. There's a very cool female Ghost Rider from just a few years ago. And so we've been covering a lot of that over on X is for Podcast, where we also covered a side universe that saw a version of Daredevil and Ghost Rider fused into Dark Devil, and he inhabited the body of a child of a clone of Spider-Man's. So, shit happens. But there's so much to be said about where this book goes that I think that's what makes issues like this tough. I want issues like this to be easier because I love who these characters become. But this is a slog.
Yeah, this is a slog. And I feel like it's doing the thing where they're like, oh, we have to put Karen in trouble again. Right. Oh, we have to have like these two dudes. Oh, we have to have him fight with a helicopter again.
And I don't know if it's maybe that, again, they were so short on things to visually reference for a new artist like John Romita. He is so new, so giving him Khazar, who there's plenty of images to reference, giving him Jungle, where there's plenty of war comics to reference, giving him Ox, who we fought, and generic skinny man, who looks an awful lot like Mastermind from X-Men. It just feels like there was a big effort created here to generate an easy to digest issue for both the creative staff and for the readers. Ultimately, that Ox is felled by charging at Daredevil, going off the roof, implicitly dying.
Because he's getting dumber. Nice. And he 100% is dead. I think we're at a 5-body kill count on Daredevil these days.
Meanwhile, I'm pretty sure this isn't far from Ox's final appearance. And I don't know how now, because that's the other thing. Ox's final thought is, it's funny, all of a sudden, I ain't even sorry about not being the Ox anymore. Somehow, I feel sort of smarter now. Like maybe the change is for the better. Are you implying that he's going to get smarter being in the small body? Because I've spent a lot of time trying to get bigger, and if it turns out it's not working because I'm getting dumber at the same time, I have a lot of problems.
I just, like, it's such a choice. It's such a choice. And, like, one of the things that I wish that, not that I wish that Stan Lee was still around, but that I wish that someone had, like, taken Stan Lee and, like, really nailed him to the wall on, like, why did you approach your heroes in such a way where it feels like everything is a geek kid fantasy? That the moment that you're not the perfect jock muscular man, it's sort of like an unseen hero. You've got skills that nobody can understand. You'll eventually, being smaller is being better. Like, why did you choose to do this? Why, like what were you pushing that agenda intentionally, or was it just sort of something that you were like, no, this is the kind of story that I like to tell of the little guy?
I wonder how much it relates back to the fact that when he was in the war, he didn't serve time in combat as much as he wrote for the army. That was his contribution to the war effort, which is necessary. I am far from coming for anybody who chose to be a part of a system that they believed they could not escape. Not coming for anybody.
Was he World War II or Korea? Two.
And maybe Korea. It might have been both. I actually would need to double check. But he definitely was someone who is kind of a smaller guy in a lot of ways. And I'm going to be honest. I wonder if when they would say, so who's reading our books? Well, the jocks are probably too busy lifting and fucking, so the nerds. Give nerds nerd fantasies. But, like, then maybe that's even how sometimes these books became that. Maybe when you vilify a group unintentionally, you drive a readership away. I'm certainly not saying, we should feel bad for the jocks. Everything turned out really well, and now everybody goes to see Marvel movies. Who cares? But there is a component to this that's like, Foggy's the weak one, Matt's the strong one, so Karen has to tend to Foggy because Matt being capable makes him less in need. So anyone capable or bigger is less the good person.
Mm-hmm.
All in all, I don't hate this issue.
Yeah.
I know we ragged on it a bit, but we also said some really good things about it.
Yeah, it's a half-baked metaphor, but at least they're going for a metaphor.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's the B romance plot is a lot closer to being the A plot than it normally is. Like we got a lot more time with the trio than we normally do.
For sure.
So I feel like we're getting closer to the balance that we want and are used to in later issues. And so I don't hate it, but I'm definitely glad that I'm able to like binge read these right now, because if this is what I got a month after those 3 Khazar issues, and like it's been 4 months since I've had a good one, like I could very easily see people being like, I dropped this, but I hear we're getting Spider-Man next issue.
Which I'm glad that we're getting Spider-Man next issue, and I'm glad that it's like 2 actual issues back to back of Spider-Man. That's really cool. Gives you a little bit of time to get with the character. But I also do feel like having Spider-Man guest spot in Daredevil is a Hail Mary to help Daredevil's monthly sales already. Mm-hmm. If Daredevil showed up in Spider-Man, I would just think they were making room for Daredevil to give him a little bit more spotlight so people might go read his mag. But having Spider-Man show up in Daredevil when we already feel like Daredevil doesn't get exactly enough page space in his own book,
it's not the best.
It's not a good optic.
It really isn't. And I'm interested to see what happens next. What brings our good friend Spider-Man swinging over to the West Side? It's a toughie. It's a toughie.
And their friendship lasts to today. We're recording this the Sunday after the new Daredevil #1 dropped. So we're even seeing Spider-Man and Daredevil's friendship continue to be an incredible journey there. So I'm excited to come back and take a look at 2 amazing issues that involve everybody's favorite thwip. But, Tori, I think it's time to give everybody the same advice we give them at the end of every episode of the Billy Club. Until next time, stay fearless. We almost had it.
We almost had it. We got to work on how we get into it.
You mean we shouldn't charge into it blind?
Yeah. We should, unlike Love and Matt, we should be a little more foresight.
A little bit thought out.
Oh yeah, less foggy in our ways.